everything goes smooth when the guy making tutorials who's been doing this forever is just adding code and it works the first time and you're really impressed. But what happens in reality when you're learning a language and you need to debug if your program is actually running? We're going to take a look at the debug module and the time traveling debugger in Elm and see some really cool ways that you can get feedback, not just to compile time from the Elm compiler, but for actual running programs. Let's take a look. I'm gonna make myself tiny again. And this is the counter example that we made together. Elm Reactor is not gonna give us access to the Elm debugger. So I'm gonna use a new command called Elm Make. And Elm Make is gonna allow us to specify what program we wanna turn into HTML. And that is going to create this index.html file that I can open in the browser. So notice that I've got the file protocol at the top. It'd be kind of hard to see, but this is our counter from before. Let me zoom in. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And what you'll see is that our app is just an HTML file that got compiled with the Elm command, and that was fast. You know, Elm's pretty fast or whatever. But what's cool is with this make command, you can pass in some additional flags. So I just added this -- debug flag, and this works for any Elm program. Now I've got this weird thing over here, this Elm logo with this blue box, and it can do some pretty cool things. So I'm gonna click increment 3 times. Do you notice anything happening in the bottom right? Is anything weird going on? Boop. This is the Elm debugger. And the Elm debugger keeps track of all the messages that get sent throughout a running program. So here's our model. And this is a little slider that lets you rewind time and see what your app was doing. So in the beginning, when I hit increment, it went up, and I'm gonna use the arrow keys to kind of like go up through these events. This allows me to see what messages came in, and allows me to see what the state looked like after that message ran. So after reset ran, the count was 0, decrement, you can see all that state. This is built into every Elm program, and it's available whenever you compile Elm in debug mode. You don't need debug mode to do this next thing I'm going to show you, which is use the debug module. So by default, every Elm program has access to a module that gives you a few helpers. So one of the helpers is debug.toString. So sometimes you're just trying to test something. Let me comment out this view here. If I want to just like print these numbers on the screen, it's a real pain to do this with HTML, because if I try to run, let me run Elm Reactor again. If I try to run this program, I get an error because text can only convert strings into HTML. So what you can use is you can use a debug.toString module, and that'll convert anything. See that lowercase a works for any type. It'll convert that to a string so that you can print out just arbitrary values. So if you want to take, this, I use this all the time when I am like working on a problem. I made a video series for Advent of Code for Elm where I would do this, and then I'd say like list.filter, x times 2, list.map. And you can just kind of see at each step, what's happening. So this is really great for like, if I want to add up all the numbers, just being able to do things one step at a time and just validating that all those steps are working as I expect. So debug.toString is a lifesaver when you just want to get something printed out so you can like test like, hey, this user come back from the database. I don't want to make a special function that displays the user in a pretty way. I just want like a very convenient, quick hack just to get that kind of screen or get that data on my screen. So that's for getting the data in HTML. But what you can also do is you can, let me add this back. Add this back in. Hopefully we got our counter working. Cool. What if you want to log messages, just like console log, to see if the count is changing as you expect? So I'm going to make some new lines here just for readability. There is a Debug.log function for that. So I'm going to use a let expression, and I'm going to say, Debug.log, count is going to be model.count. So I can even log like incrementing count. I'm like screaming for some reason here. But I can do this, I can refresh. And then if we look in the console, look at this console, it's got some garbage in there. When I click minus and reset, nothing happens. But as I click plus, oops, clear filters. As I click plus, you can see that Elm is sending this debug message out. And the reason that there's this weird underscore equals is because debug is designed to kind of be used inline. So what you can do is you can use this with a pipeline to kind of print out what values are as they go. So you can say new count. So instead of having to do that let expression, what you can do is you can say like, okay, I've got my model count +1, and then I want to debug log that. And what's cool about debug log is it'll print it out and it'll return the value too. So you can just kind of throw this in any statement you want. So I can just do this, and then I can say plus, and you'll see the new count gets printed out. It prints out the one, and then it returns it again. So if we kind of hover over, or we kind of look at this definition when I type it, you'll see it takes in a string, which is kind of a label that it's going to print to the console. And then it's going to take in a value and just return it so that it can continue to be used by the count equals expression, which is expecting this whole thing to return. This whole thing to return the count. So that's debug log. And then there's one more that's really helpful. Let's say I'm trying to add new behavior, like launch rocket. When I add this, the Elm compiler is going to be like, hey, you didn't handle all your cases. But it's possible that I'm just not ready to implement that right now. I'm like working on other parts of the code base. So what I can do is instead of just returning model and like not doing anything, as a reminder for myself to come back, I can say, to do add launch rocket handler. And debug.to is a type that you give it a string as a label, and it'll just always work. It'll just pretend that you implemented that function. Whatever return type it needs, it'll work. So that's what the debug function does. And so if I refresh this, my app compiles and everything works. But something to be careful about is that if you ever add that launch rocket button, let's swap out reset with launch. This is the only way that you can get an Elm runtime exception besides of like infinite recursion or something crazy. So I'm going to clear this out. Plus works fine, minus works fine. I click launch, and look, I've got this error in my app that called debug crash, which is the internal function that is used. So all these debug modules, all these things I showed you, they're great for development. But what's really cool about Elm, that Elm make command that I showed you before to help with the debugger, when you build your code for production, you're not going to just run Elm make. You're going to run Elm make optimize, and that's going to minify the JavaScript, and it's going to kind of eliminate a bunch of the code you're not using. Elm's got an incredible dead code elimination process where it can get things down to the function. So you always want to use this optimize flag in production. And what's really cool about this, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, is when I run this, Elm will tell you if you have any debug module usages in your code. So something that I do all the time when I'm debugging is I will just have like debug.log test or debug.log fart or something that's really easy for me to search. Elm has built into it a safeguard to make it so that you can't forget to take a console log out of production. I love that. And the thing that I really love about it is if you have any debug to-dos in your code, something that I did when I was working at my last company, we used Elm in production. And if I had it to do in a PR, what I would do is I would push that PR, I'd leave the to-dos in there, and then the build will fail until I've handled all my to-dos because of this error message. So it's really nice to be able to say like, hey, I'm working on this, but we can't ship it because, there's these 3 features. Sometimes when you're working on an advanced feature, and you have a lot of moving pieces, it's nice to kind of note like, hey, I got to come back here, but I don't want to lose my train of thought right now. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. So Debug.to is like my favorite thing in the world. It's very great, specifically how it works when it comes time to build your app for production. So this prevents all of this kind of stuff from making it into production, and that's what makes it so that you're not going to get runtime errors in practice. Hopefully that was a good overview of the debug modules for you. Next, we're going to talk about Elm JSON and some Elm packages, and I'll see you in that video.